The candles in the great dining hall of Rivenhall Estate burned low, throwing long shadows across the polished table. Eleanor Hartley sat near the far end, her back straight, her hands folded neatly in her lap, though her heart was pounding beneath her plain gray dress. She had been the Duke's companion and governess to his young niece for nearly 8 months now, and in that time, she had learned every rule of this glittering world without ever truly belonging to it. Tonight, the Duke of Rivenhall was hosting some of the most important families in the county. Lords and ladies in silk and jewels filled the table, their laughter sharp and their words sharper. Eleanor had been asked to attend only because young Lady Sophia had begged her not to leave her side during such a grand affair. So Eleanor sat quietly, trying to be invisible, trying not to draw attention to herself in a room full of people who saw her as nothing more than hired help. At the head of the table sat Sebastian Ashworth, Duke of Rivenhall. He was tall, with dark hair that always seemed slightly out of place, and eyes the color of a stormy sea. He had inherited his title only 2 years earlier, after his father's sudden death, and the weight of it still sat heavily on his shoulders. Tonight, he wore his authority like armor, cool and distant, laughing at the right moments, nodding at the right times. Eleanor had come to know a different side of him. In the quiet hours of the evening, when the household had settled and the halls were empty, she and Sebastian often crossed paths in the library. He would ask her opinion on books, on politics, on the running of the estate. He listened to her the way no one of his rank had ever listened to a woman of her modest birth. Slowly, without either of them fully admitting it, something had grown between them, something Eleanor did not dare name, not even to herself. But tonight, at this table full of powerful strangers, that Sebastian was nowhere to be seen. It happened during a discussion about the upcoming harvest laws. Lord Pemberton, a heavy-set man with a booming voice, made a careless remark about how the poor should simply work harder instead of complaining about wages. Eleanor, forgetting herself for a moment, spoke up. "With respect, my lord," she said, her voice steady, despite the sudden silence that fell over the table. "I believe the poor already work harder than most in this room could imagine. Perhaps the trouble lies not in their effort, but in what they are paid for it." A few guests exchanged surprised glances. Lord Pemberton's face reddened, and he turned to Sebastian with a raised eyebrow, as if expecting the Duke to correct his impertinent governess. Eleanor looked at Sebastian too, hoping, foolishly perhaps, that he might agree with her, or at least defend her right to speak. Instead, she watched something close behind his eyes, like a door shutting. "Miss Hartley speaks out of turn," Sebastian said smoothly, not quite meeting her gaze. "She is here to look after my niece, not to discuss matters of policy. I apologize for the interruption." The words landed like a slap. Eleanor felt her cheeks burn, not from embarrassment alone, but from something deeper, betrayal. She had spoken from her heart, and he had dismissed her in front of everyone, as though she were nothing more than a servant who had forgotten her place. The conversation moved on. Lord Pemberton chuckled and returned to his wine, but Eleanor barely heard another word for the rest of the dinner. She smiled when she needed to smile, nodded when she needed to nod, and inside, something that had been growing quietly for months began to wither. When the guests finally retired for the evening, Eleanor excused herself from Lady Sophia's side and walked briskly to her small room on the 3rd floor. She closed the door behind her and stood there for a long moment, staring at nothing. She had known, of course, that a duke and a governess could never truly be equals. She had told herself that 100 times over the past months, every time her heart had leaped a little too high at the sound of his footsteps in the hallway, every time his eyes had lingered on her a moment too long. She had told herself it did not matter, that she only wanted his friendship, his respect. But watching him fold so easily under the weight of other people's opinions, watching him choose his reputation over her dignity without even hesitating, had shown her the truth she had been avoiding. She would always be an embarrassment to him, a secret to be managed, not a person to be honored. Eleanor did not cry. She was too angry for that. Instead, she pulled her small trunk from beneath her bed and began to pack. Her hands moved quickly, folding dresses, gathering the few books she owned, tucking away the letters from her mother. She would not stay in a house where she was tolerated in private and denied in public. She had her pride, even if she had little else. By the time the clock in the hallway struck 10, Eleanor was walking down the long gravel drive of Rivenhall Estate, her trunk in one hand and a lantern in the other, heading toward the village 3 miles away, where her aunt kept a small cottage. The night air was cold and sharp, and somewhere above the clouds were gathering, heavy and dark. She did not look back at the house. Inside, Sebastian sat alone in his study, a glass of brandy, untouched on the desk before him. The last of his guests had gone to their rooms, and the house had fallen quiet, but he could not shake the uneasy feeling that had settled over him since dinner. He kept seeing Eleanor's face in that moment, not angry, not tearful, but something worse. Disappointed, as though she had expected better of him, and he had failed to meet even the smallest measure of it. He told himself he had done the right thing. A duke could not allow a governess to challenge a lord at his own table, no matter how correct her words might have been. It was simply how things were done. It was expected of him. And yet, the excuse felt hollow even as he thought it. A soft knock came at the study door, and his sister, Lady Margaret, stepped inside without waiting for an answer. She had always done that, ever since they were children, and Sebastian had never had the heart to stop her. "You look troubled," she said, settling into the chair across from him. "I am simply tired," he replied, not looking up. Margaret studied him for a long moment. "I saw what happened at dinner, Sebastian, the way you spoke to Miss Hartley." He said nothing, which was answer enough. "She was right, you know," Margaret continued, "about the harvest laws, about everything, but that is not really what troubles you, is it?" Sebastian finally looked up, and something in his expression, tired, uncertain, almost young, made Margaret's tone soften. "You care for her," she said gently. "You have for months. Everyone in this house has seen it, except perhaps you." "It does not matter what I feel," Sebastian said, his voice rough. "I am the Duke of Rivenhall. I have obligations, expectations, the family name, the estate, the way society will judge." "And what good is any of that?" Margaret interrupted. "If it makes you into a man who humiliates the person he loves, to protect his own comfort. Father built this family's name on duty, yes, but he also built it on cowardice, Sebastian. He never told our mother how he truly felt until it was nearly too late. Do you want that same regret?" Sebastian opened his mouth to argue, but no words came. He thought of Eleanor's face again, the flash of hurt quickly hidden behind practiced composure. He thought of every quiet evening in the library, every conversation that had made him feel more like himself than any grand ballroom ever had. He stood so suddenly that his chair scraped loudly against the floor. "I need to speak with her," he said. Margaret smiled faintly. "I believe she left an hour ago. One of the maids saw her walking down the drive with her trunk." The words hit him like cold water. "Left? Tonight? In this weather? You should hurry, Sebastian, before the storm catches her." He did not need to be told twice. Within minutes, he had thrown on his riding coat and was in the stables, saddling his horse himself, rather than waking a groom. Rain had already begun to fall, light at first, then heavier, drumming against the stable roof as he swung up into the saddle and rode out into the darkness. The road to the village was uneven and slick with mud, but Sebastian pushed his horse onward, ignoring the rain that soaked through his coat and ran down his face. His mind raced faster than the horse's hooves. He thought of every moment over the past months when he could have said something, could have shown Eleanor that her opinion, her presence, her very self mattered more to him than any rule of society. He had let fear keep him silent, and tonight, that silence had cost him the one thing that had made his life at Rivenhall feel like more than duty and inheritance. Lightning flashed across the sky, illuminating the narrow road ahead, and for a moment, Sebastian caught sight of a small figure walking along the roadside, a lantern swinging weakly in the wind. "Eleanor," he called out, though the wind tore the word away almost as soon as it left his mouth. She turned, startled, and for a moment simply stared at the rider approaching through the rain. When she recognized him, her expression hardened, and she turned to keep walking. Sebastian dismounted quickly, leaving his horse to wander, and hurried after her on foot, the mud pulling at his boots. "Eleanor, please," he said, catching up to her. "Let me speak with you." "You made yourself quite clear tonight, Your Grace," she said without stopping. I understood perfectly. I was wrong, he said, and something in his voice, raw, unguarded, made her pause. I was wrong to speak to you that way. I was wrong to let my own fear of what others would think matter more than what I know to be true. Eleanor turned to face him fully now, rain streaming down both their faces, her lantern casting a small circle of light between them. And what is that exactly? That you were right about the harvest laws, he said. That you have been right about nearly everything since the day you arrived at Rivenhall. That I have spent months listening to you, learning from you, feeling more like myself in your company than I ever have surrounded by lords and ladies who only care for my title. He took a step closer. I let my pride silence me tonight, and I am sorry for it, more sorry than I know how to say. Sorry does not undo it, Eleanor said, though her voice had lost some of its sharp edge. Sorry does not change what I am to you, Sebastian. A companion, when it is convenient, an embarrassment when it is not. That is not true, he said firmly. You are not an embarrassment. You are the only honest voice I have heard in this house in years. I was a coward tonight, but I am done being a coward. He reached for her hand, and though she hesitated, she did not pull away. I do not care what Lord Pemberton thinks, or what any of them think. I care what you think of me. I came out here in the middle of the night, in the rain, because the thought of you walking away from Rivenhall, from me, was more unbearable than any scandal society could invent. Eleanor studied his face for a long moment, searching for the doubt she had seen so clearly at dinner. She did not find it. What she found instead was something she had never quite let herself believe was there. An honesty stripped bare of title and expectation. A man standing before her not as a duke, but simply as himself. If I return, she said slowly, it will not be as your secret. Not as someone hidden away in the library after dark, spoken to kindly in private, and dismissed in public. If I return, you will treat me as an equal, in every room, in front of every lord and lady in the county. I promise you that, Sebastian said without hesitation. I promise you that and more. The rain had softened now, falling gently around them instead of pouring. Eleanor felt the last of her anger loosen its grip, replaced by something warmer, something she had been afraid to name for months. Then I will come back, she said quietly. Not tonight perhaps, but soon. And you will keep your promise. I will, he said, for as long as you will have me. By the time they walked back toward the estate together, Sebastian leading his horse by the reins and Eleanor beside him, the storm had passed, leaving the sky scattered with stars. Word of that night spread quickly through the village, and the great house alike. How the Duke of Rivenhall had ridden out alone in a storm, and knelt in the mud outside a cottage door, begging forgiveness from a governess. Some called it scandalous. Others called it the most honest thing anyone had ever seen a duke do. Eleanor did not care what they called it. She only knew that for the first time since she had come to Rivenhall, she had been seen, not as a companion, not as hired help, but as herself, fully and completely. And that, she thought, was worth far more than any title the world could offer.